Welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this event. I think we have a very interesting hour ahead of us. I am Sharon Constanson, Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and I'll welcome you here to our event in London today from wherever you are in the world. And I see we have many continents represented today. This event was a long time in the making. It took ages to find these two really important gentlemen and to find a time in their diary where they were both available for a whole hour. We attempted to achieve this before their term of office came to an end, but we've missed that by days, weeks, not by a lot, but we did miss it. But here we have them together at last. They're going to give us insights and share their experiences of the last 2 years and why that is profoundly unusual and what foundations they've put in place for the City of London going forward. We're going to cover the topics from a number of different viewpoints, and I think we'll get some interesting insights into the years these two gentlemen have had. I've known Michael for a number of years now, a good few number of years, and had the honor recently of having a tour around the Old Bailey, actually taken by Michael himself, which was a real honor because he knows that building so extremely well. And I learned things that I had never learned before about the way the courts work, how they're structured, what they look like, and the kinds of things that they need to worry about in terms of security and the very other issues that they have to deal with there. I was actually one of the city freemen who had the honor of voting in these two gentlemen 2 and a bit years ago when they were first elected to the role of sheriff. And I have to say it was my first time ever to be able to go to one of those events and thoroughly enjoyed it. We're going to take you on a tour through what happens in the City of London and how that is different to Greater London. And at this point, would just like to say if anybody has any questions, try and use the Q&A function for the questions, use the chat function for conversations by all means. I have put web links in for both the gentlemen, which they have equally done, put in additional web links as well, so that you can read up about the gentlemen. And at this point, I'd actually like to introduce my panel, the esteemed crowd that are, just one second, I need to find my desk. Yes, my desk is back with me. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. It's lovely to see you sharing time with me. And to introduce it, Alderman Professor Michael Mainelli, first scientist, financier, works on trying to promote the societal advance through better finance and technology, which all sounds very fancy for the executive chairman of the Zen Group, which he co-founded in the City of London as a leading commercial think tank back in 1994. And just picking out a couple of key words out of his amazing business history. He did research in rocket science, computing in architecture and mapping, led him to start Swiss companies in seismology, cartography and energy information. He was first educated as an accountant, which doesn't sound like it rings true because it doesn't fit into the brief of what I would call an accountant, was a senior partner of what is the today BDO and has worked for the Ministry of Defence as well. I'd like to now introduce Common Councillor Christopher Hayward, and he will explain what Common Councillor means because it doesn't sound as fancy as it is. It's a very fancy title. He's formerly Deputy Leader of the Herefordshire and Dorset County Councils and was elected to Common Council of the Corporation of the City of London for Broad Street Ward in March 2013. If you have a look at his biography, he has various different council roles. He has many ward roles, many guild roles, many livery company roles. And there are many of them that he has been involved in. His original career was in aviation and aviation infrastructure, global events management, and is now a NED, non-executive director in property and infrastructure sectors. So two amazingly competent men in their ordinary careers and have now taken to working for the City of London. So thank you very much, gentlemen. I welcome you.
Thank you.
We're going to cover in conversation positioning of what is the City of London, how does it work? We're then going to have a more personal chat about the individuals, their backgrounds, why they are where they are, and then looking at the future of the City of London as a result of the pandemic and as a result of Brexit. And then we're going to summarize. So just to give you an idea of what is ahead. So maybe starting with you, Michael, what is a sheriff of the City of London?
Well, the sheriff is a very ancient role, Sharon, and I won't try and bore your audience with too much history. We believe it might date as early as, well, it definitely dates back to the 7th century, perhaps as early as 640 AD. And originally it had three roles. One was defense of the city. The second was taxation, hence the Sheriff of Nottingham type elements. We weren't necessarily loved in those days. Maybe we're not loved now. The third role was very much the administration of justice, or the rule of law, as we put it these days. And those three roles have continued really through the centuries. There have been a few chops and changes, but nothing very material. Of those three roles, though, the first one, defense of the city, is quite vestigial. The City of London Police, which is still an independent force, does that. And on taxation, the City of London raises quite a bit of tax monies, which are distributed to other London boroughs. In fact, the vast majority is distributed to other London boroughs. And we, in theory, oversee that, but that is done really by the officers in the corporation. So the third role, running the Old Bailey, is very real. Chris and I live there with our wives. There are apartments there, and we're responsible for, as I like to put it, 18 courts, 400,000 square feet, 74 jail cells, 2 cabinets of medieval torture equipment, and no television. So what you want to do tonight, honey? It became kind of interesting. But in terms of running those courts, we're effectively part-time amateur chairmen. But those amateur chairmen have well over a millennia ensured that the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court, remains the premier, most prestigious criminal court in the country and probably in the world.
Thank you. That goes to show how long it's been around and how prevalent it is in every day of our society. Just listening to you when you took us on the tour of how things are happening every day in the building, the activities that occur within the building. Maybe, Chris, if I could direct the next question to you. How do your particular roles and the way described by Michael, how does that fit into the mayor of the City of London? How does that role, what does that role do? What does that exist? How does that?
Okay, Sharon, thank you very much indeed. And it's probably worth adding that Michael and I are the first sheriffs of the City of London to do 2 consecutive years since 1228. Which is incredible.
Going to come to that.
Sorry, I don't want to
So
jump your questions, but
no problem. We're going to get there anyway.
We're going to get there anyway. But let me answer your specific question. Look, as most people know, but many don't understand the difference, there are, of course, 2 mayors of London. There is the Right Honourable, the Lord Mayor of London, who is the Lord Mayor of the City of London, the Square Mile, and who resides in Mansion House. And in that respect, the 2 sheriffs kind of act as de facto deputies to that Lord Mayor, certainly in respect of the civic functions of the city. So the various livery dinners and functions, the various charitable support that the Lord Mayor offers, the various speaking engagements, indeed the international business engagements, all of those, the 2 deputies to the Lord Mayor in reality. Now, the Mayor of London, of course, is a different London. So the 32 London boroughs and over the city in that sense as well, they are a politician from a political party, whereas in the corporation, City of London, we're in the main all independents, and they are elected by the whole of Greater London and have responsibility discharged to them by government for a number of things, like our transport system, through Transport for London. They have responsibility for the Metropolitan Police, whilst we have responsibility, as Michael said, for our own Square Mile police, the City of London Police. They have responsibility for housing targets and various other more major functions that are actually pan-London rather than just those of the city.
Thank you, Chris. I understand that the Right Honourable Lord Mayor of London has an international standing that is quite unique. Am I correct in that understanding? Could you share that with us, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I mean, the Lord Mayor of London is a trade ambassador, not just for the City of London, but really for the whole of the United Kingdom. And every Lord Mayor in normal times, non-COVID times, who serves the city, will expect to spend 100 of their 365 days traveling the world as an ambassador for primarily the UK and financial services and professional services sectors across the United Kingdom and representing that across the world. And they travel really at the equivalent level to that of a Minister of State on behalf of Her Majesty's government. So huge global recognition, huge convening power, huge soft power to promote sectors which in the City of London people don't realize actually the businesses in the City of London contribute no less than 10% of the total UK tax take. So when the government talk about leveling up or leveling down or whatever, they can't level anything without the taxation and the income they derive from city businesses. So it may be only a square mile, but it's 530,000 business commuters coming in a day pre-pandemic. So they have a huge ambassadorial role for their 1 year as the Lord Mayor of the city.
On that basis, you talk about 1 year, which has been the absolute norm, and you did allude to it a moment ago, Chris. But maybe, Michael, if you could just share with us, how different it's been because it was 2 years, why it was 2 years, and what has been the advantage and disadvantage for you as individuals and for the city of it being the 2 years, not necessarily the pandemic yet. We'll get to that part.
Well, it's normal, as Chris indicated, the first time since 1228. So it's clearly something that happens rarely. And the reason it happens rarely is the idea is that we in the city believe very much in democracy. We style the City of London as the world's oldest continuous democracy. Any Manx friends dialing in might have a little tussle with it, but it's a friendly tussle. We don't know who is older. And the sheriffs are therefore probably the oldest elected positions, secular, at least in the world. Perhaps the Vatican outdoes us, but I think when it comes to secular positions, they're very, very old. And part of what kept that going was the tradition that you really did only have a year, and then you had to go back amongst your fellow man or woman these days, and therefore you couldn't become much of a tyrant. Now, Chris and I, when presented with the opportunity to become tyrants, took it as, oh, no, sorry, that wasn't what we did. Basically, during COVID, it was impossible to have an election and to get everybody together safely. It has traditionally been a physical election rather than one done electronically. And so all of this caught us on the hop, as it did, in fact, every other elected entity in the UK. And we were asked if we would stay on for an additional year for continuity purposes. I think the interesting thing for us was, at the same time, the most senior magistrate, the recorder of London, was being sought for the post. And so whilst we were part-time chairman, we did get to do a little bit more than average in terms of how would the Old Bailey adjust to new circumstances. And we had to take those measures last February, last March. Mm-hmm. So there was some opportunity to get involved. I think in terms of good and bad, well, clearly it is an honor to be asked to stick around and hang in. But it did get quite lengthy, and a lot of what we did, both Chris and I, was to try and bind the city together. People would invite us to come to their Zoom meetings, and we earnestly tried to attend every single one we could possibly do. Hence some of the reason you found it a little bit difficult to get hold of us. We were constantly on the road. I totted up several, well, probably between the two of us, probably over 1,500 events, something like that, where we were participating and basically saying to people, the city's here, it's alive. And we're very much part of it. And I think that was probably the biggest positive thing about the city was the community in many ways reached out and touched people that frequently they haven't touched quite as well as they might have in the past. Those overseas, students were able to participate more in city functions, retirees, people living not in London any longer, but who'd gone out to the countryside. So there was an upwelling of intellectual activity of the city over this period, which I think both of us welcomed.
Which is something from the point of view of a freeman of the City of London. It's been an amazing time and also an honor to know both of you for that longer period. Just share with the audience How does this work commercially? Do you earn salaries or, I know, I see you laugh. Chris, do you want to just give some insights first and then maybe Michael add anything that you'd like to add thereafter?
Well, Sharon, we certainly wished we did earn some salaries out of it, but actually we get paid precisely zero as sheriffs of the City of London. But we don't do it for that reason. But of course, it does impact on your business life as well. I mean, Michael obviously is running full-time his own business, and in my case, I've got my non-executive directorships plus a huge portfolio of work in the corporation that I'm engaged in as deputy chairman of its policy committee. So it impacts on your life in a very, very big way. Perhaps not so much financially for me, because I'm effectively doing what I do 5 days a week in the city anyway for nothing. So nothing plus nothing still equals nothing. But it does impact on your commercial life. It does impact on your ability to do your business activities. I think Michael can say more about this, but I mean, from Michael's point of view, he was able to take his business online in a mega way and make it hugely successful online. And I think that was a great opportunity and a challenge at the same time for all of us. All of a sudden, something like Zoom, which I'd always thought was a firework, turns out to be something that's a communication method. And you're actually going on screen and you're actually, doing what we're doing with you here today. And I don't think those days will ever change. We'll never go back. There's no old normal. There's a new normal. And I think the sort of engagement we're involved in this afternoon with you will always now be a part of things going forward as well.
I'm finding it interesting trying to arrange an in-person event with a live stream to the crowd globally. And everyone's going, oh, how do you do that? I think you always did the one. We've done the other. So why not do them at the same time? And we're finding a lot of it's being seen to be more complex. And it suddenly everyone's like, oh, is that how easy it is to do? And we'll get forward in being able to do the best of both worlds. But I agree with you. If we had to go all in person, we'd have a fraction of the relevance and input that we're getting as a result of our new normal. Michael, anything you'd like to add to that one?
Yeah, but two things. I don't want to belabor the bit that you've donated your time. And Chris is absolutely right. My business partner said, well, we knew we were going to donate 1 year of your time, but 2 years, yeah, we're going to work your tail off. So we stepped down from office just about 3 weeks ago, and yeah, they have been working me very, very hard the last 3 weeks, and intend to do so. But I think this is an opportunity. Chris and I are both really excited about trying to get more people involved in the City of London Corporation. And a lot of people say to me, how do you become an alderman, or how do you become a common councillor? And the answer is very simple. You get elected. And we are currently going through a voter registration drive for elections that are going to be held next March. And I would encourage anybody who is more interested in what they've heard today to perhaps think about going to the corporation one side, certainly making sure you're registered as a voter if you live or work in the City of London. And I will emphasize if you work as well. And secondly, consider standing for office if you feel right. In truth, we get a lot out of it. I'm not going to pretend there's some kind of a hair shirt and people say, oh, you get to go to a lot of dinners and lunches. Yeah, I mean, if free lunches and dinners are what you're after. But the biggest thing is meeting people and really being at the heart of a community that is very strong after a millennium and more. And I would like to see that continue. But to do that, it means bringing in other people as well. And so any of your listeners are interested, please sign on or get in touch with us via you, Sharon, or directly.
Yes, I can.
Line there.
Please bear with us, Michael, and I'm not sure if this applied to Chris as well, but your ride through the city saying farewell on horseback. And I was about a block away from you at one stage and just couldn't get to see you go past. And I do apologize, I did try.
Well, I've always had a mantra that all of the stuff that we do is about commerce, community, and charity. Those are the three things. Chris described the ambassadorial role for financial, professional, business, and technical services. The community bit I just emphasized, but charity is part of it as well. Chris could talk about his charity fundraise, which was very significant. But what I wanted to do was to bring attention to the fact that the city was reopening. And so in the middle of September, on my trusty steed, Leo, who was lent to me by the honorable artillery companies like Cavalry, I, along with 7 of their officers and 2 police horses and 2 police outriders on bicycles, this grand procession marched through the city, visiting something like 18 livery halls and greeting people and saying it was open. And we were also pleased that we raised a significant amount of money for charity along the way, which went to the Sheriff and Recorder's Fund, which is a very venerable and ancient charity dating back to the 19th century that is there to help really get prisoners back into society as soon as they're released. But Chris, you might want to have a word about your fundraiser too.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Michael. I did something completely different from Michael. I mean, I'm not that tall, so I was a bit nervous about getting up on a big high horse like Michael did. So last time I did was not the best experience. So I decided to lose weight for charity, and I lost during my time as sheriff 3.5 stone, and managed to do that sponsored for the Sheriff and Recorder's Fund, and raised nearly £20,000 doing it for the charity. And so I'm only half the sheriff I ever was at the start, shall we say.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations on that, because that meant you had to focus on it every single day through all those lunches and all those dinners, and cheat the whole way to yourself and not be able to eat everything. That must have been awful.
Dreadful.
You've met so many interesting people. Between the 2 of you, maybe Chris first, who was the most significant person that will always stand out that you met in these 2 years, either online or in person, but maybe in person preferably?
Well, it's a big question you ask, Sharon. I think for me, the people I most enjoyed meeting, or some of those I found most interesting when I met them during my time as sheriff, were members of the royal family, because you do get to receive quite a lot of the royal family in the city when you're a sheriff. And certainly Princess Anne, Prince Charles, the Duke of York and Duke of Wessex, all were received. And also Princess Eugenie when she came to the Old Bailey. And I remember, why do I remember Princess Eugenie in particular come to the Old Bailey? Because she said to me, Sheriff, she said, I really want to see a court. I've never been to the Old Bailey before. And I said, well, Your Royal Highness, really, I'm supposed to be taking you to open a conference in the Great Hall. I think we really ought to take you there. And she said, no, show me court number 1. I've heard about court number 1. So I took her to see court number 1. And on the way back, we passed the warrants that Michael and I received from the Queen appointing us as her 2 sheriffs. And there was this great big framed warrant on the wall. And she said, what's that, Sheriff? And I said, well, that, Your Royal Highness, is what your grandmother gives us to appoint us as her 2 sheriffs of the City of London. And she said, oh, let me stop. I really want to read what Granny had to say to you guys. So she read every word of that warrant. And that was a lot of fun. But I also had some nice guests come along to Old Bailey lunches as well. So Theresa May, the former Prime Minister of the UK, came as one of my guests to lunch. And that was a very interesting person to host as well. And actually, one of the joys of hosting lunches at the Old Bailey with the judges is you get to invite, Michael and I get to invite lots and lots of different people as our guests, and to dinner parties as well. And frankly, in summary, everybody's interesting. Everybody's got a different story to tell. And if you love meeting people in a way that certainly I do, for me, everybody's special.
Fantastic, thank you. Michael, what was your most critical, important, memorable person that you met?
Well, I'm with Chris. Everybody's interesting, and it's a great post because, as Chris says, you can invite people, and most of them just say yes, and it's great. So, in a way, your obligation is to have an outreach at different levels, locally, business-wise, nationally, and internationally. So, I'll pick both extremes there. And we met a lot of fun people that I wouldn't have normally met. Prue Leith came by for lunch and was very complimentary about the cooking. We had Amanda Owen, the Yorkshire shepherdess, who came down for a sheep drive. So that's all the celebrity stuff and all that. And they're fascinating people. But I'll pick out 2. One is Doreen. And Doreen is the curly queen of the Old Kent Road. And you can't resist her because she insists that you come. And she had me dancing around a maypole with Chris on our very first whole day as sheriffs. There we were dancing around a maypole in Guildhall Yard. So that's kind of one local convention.
Nearly as famous as Theresa May's dancing in South Africa.
Yes.
Yeah, We leap higher. We're bigger. We try harder. So that was one extreme, and of course the other extreme is we have this enormous outreach. So ambassadors would come by and chat and talk about all sorts of things. But Chris and I took an unusual gift at the Old Bailey, and that was from the city of Xi'an, which gave us a terracotta warrior. I hasten to add a replica, but terracotta warrior, and we've arranged a gift to go back to them. It's all part of this city to city exchange. And during times when there was a lot of geopolitics on, we want to keep all of those relationships at city to city level open where we possibly can. So, for me, yes, we started by meeting the local pearly queen, who gave us little choice but to meet her, all the way to ending with a ceremony where we formally accepted this kind gift from the citizens of Xi'an.
Fantastic. I think let's move now to the actual City of London and to the issues that the city has had to deal with. Michael, if we maybe start with you, I want us to cover both the issues of the pandemic, but equally running parallel to the pandemic with the issues of Brexit. So maybe if you could talk at it from one perspective, and then maybe Chris from the other, or mingle them, and I'll share the questions. Just give us some insights that you'd like to share first.
Okay, well, I think you've actually got us at a good level here, because I run 3 global indices: the Global Financial Centers Index, the Smart Centers Index, and the Global Green Finance Index. And in Xi'an, one of our research strands is the research on commercial centers around the world, which we've been doing for a few decades. So I see it at that level. Chris, I think, can talk a lot harder detail about the physical environment of the city itself. At a global level, yes, we were all a bit concerned about Brexit, and we were certainly concerned about the pandemic. In truth, I don't think we're ever going to be able to tease apart the effects of Brexit on the City of London as a financial center, commercial center. It's just too entwined with a lot of local issues, a lot of global issues, and then a pandemic coming on top. I don't think we'll ever be able to look at it. It is fairly clear, and I hasten that I was a Remainer, not a Remoaner, but it hasn't, it hasn't certainly been a fall off the edge of a cliff, but it hasn't been easy either. There have been real jobs that have moved. There have been real assets that are now being managed elsewhere. There are real changes to trading venues, but equally, there's new business coming. So I think it's a question of maintaining competitiveness going forward that matters far more than whether you hold on to every last bit of business. When it comes to the pandemic, one of the interesting challenges across the world for all financial centers is, what does it mean? I've often said that the geographic City of London has had a pretty torrid year or two now, and that's no surprise. For the last 20 plus months, it's been difficult to commute into, utilization is down, etc. But the southeast of England financial, professional, and technical cluster has actually had a boom year. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we've got a much more wide interpretation of what it means to be a financial center. I think in the case of the City of London, it is without doubt one of the most intense commuter zones on the planet. In normal times, 525,000 people are dropped onto 1.12 square miles. That's an amazing concentration, higher than any comparable sites you might pick in New York or Tokyo or Singapore, what have you. Now, does that mean disaster, that that's no longer useful? I disagree. I think that there are tremendous opportunities for London, but some of them, I believe, will need some changes to the way that we think about our physical realm, opening it up and making it more accommodating to people. We've pretty much got the catchment area we could possibly have in England. So we're going to have to, I believe, supplement that with an even richer look at international business. And we're having those discussions. But Chris, you've got strong thoughts on this too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Well, first of all, on Brexit, I'm unashamedly in the same camp as Michael. I was a Remainer. I believed that the future for the city was best served by staying inside the EU. And I remember when that Brexit vote came through, my first thoughts were, we are going to lose literally tens and tens of thousands of jobs in the square mile. And actually, we did lose some jobs, but we didn't lose anywhere near as many as I feared we might. We lost some over passporting, particularly where the banks were concerned. But we were disappointed that when the Brexit bill eventually came out, there was really little consideration of financial and professional services. We didn't get equivalence, which was something we were really fighting for. So we felt we were a little bit pushed to one side. But I agree with Michael. I think that the future with the EU and the relationship with the EU is more important than the past. We're not going to bring back our membership, so we have to create a new relationship based upon shared interests. Now, in terms of the pandemic itself and how it impacted on the city, I mean, it's interesting. Michael's quite right. We're 530,000 commuters a day come into the city. At its worst moment during lockdown, we went down to just 5,000 people coming into the city. Now, today we're up at around about 300,000, give or take, which showing a good, strong recovery. They're mainly coming in on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So we nickname them the twats, the Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And more we're seeing sort of Mondays and Fridays being those days when people are maybe working from home and a little bit more hybrid. We were very concerned in the Square Mile, in the corporation, about the impact on the SMEs and the local businesses, and particularly those things like, the coffee shops, the sandwich shops, those small businesses, would they survive? So we created a COVID recovery fund of £50 million from the corporation, which we could pitch to businesses, and they could apply for grants of up to £100,000 per business. Because the one thing I feared most personally was the idea that we might end up with boarded up shops, boarded up units, and then the big businesses don't come back because the infrastructure that feeds them is actually not there. And I'm pleased to say that hasn't happened. In the main, yes, we've lost some businesses, but actually we've kept an awful lot of those smaller businesses that were a challenge for us. But let me just say one thing in conclusion on this subject, because it's an interesting couple of stats for you on future growth and future prospects for the city. And it's this. I used to be chairman of the Planning and Transportation Committee in the city. And in our first full month of lockdown, that's April 2020, our planning department handled more pre-application discussions than we'd done in the previous 5 years. And that went on in 2021 to mean our planning committee had to meet twice a month instead of once a month for the first 6 months to process all these new towers, these new towers that were going to be built in the city. And when I talk to global investors and I talk to developers, they all say, look, the City of London is still a safe haven for investment. We look at it in a long term, over a 10-year window. We see that continued growth. Yes, that growth may be different. Those buildings may be different. They may be used differently. But the long-term future for the city, I'm really bullish and optimistic about, because I can see that growth continuing on.
Yeah, I'd echo Chris on that. That SME fund, Chris and I personally nursed through a couple of the applications, because a lot of businesses, honestly didn't believe it was there, and no business likes paperwork. So, the whole corporation's been really good at trying to push that through and keep them moving. But a lot of people talk about, when things return to normal. I don't want things to return to normal. I want things to be better. And I think that there's some really exciting times ahead. And when I too talk with developers, what I find interesting is that they are really trying to explore better business cases. They want a better business case for property, so that when they say to somebody, here's your property, what am I getting for having space? Oh, here's what you're getting. And they want to see a lot more throughput. They want to see that their people are meeting more people, of the right kinds of people. And a phrase that I've taken to using over the last couple of years, and something I'd like to build on, is the idea that we are really a knowledge mile as much as we are a square mile or a charity mile or a community mile, but we are very much a knowledge mile. And that's what people are going for. And so the new normal that I anticipate is one with a heightened amount of intellectual activity, which we've seen during the lockdown. We've seen that rise. I'd like to see that continue, and London to be one of the premier, as it is, but even more of a premier intellectual center around the world.
Just picking up on that comment you've just made, Michael, we all see London as being the center of the universe because we sit in the middle of the globe, and of course we are the most important. Relatively speaking, where was the City of London globally? The whole world got hit by the pandemic, not just us. Where does London sit now relative to where it was?
Well, it sits broadly where it was. I would say the pandemic hit all centers to some degree. What's been interesting about the pandemic and our numbers. So we, just to remind folks, we published the 30th edition of our Financial Centers Index last month. We published the Green Index just last week, and we'll be publishing the Smart Centers Index next month. So I won't give you the results for the next one. But in the green finance area, London is holding its own in an increasingly competitive arena. Increasingly competitive because the US centers and the Chinese centers have really woken up to it. We'll be seeing a lot more of this over the next couple of weeks at COP. Looking at London just as a financial center, though, it slipped very, very slightly in the ratings, but statistically it was completely insignificant. And the ranking still remains New York top. London has been top in the past, New York followed by London, and then followed by the Asian centers. And what's intriguing as well about the Asian centers in the last edition, much to my surprise, people think I pushed the numbers around to suit myself. No, I'm sitting there as interested as anyone else. I just happened to see it a few weeks earlier. What we saw was that the Chinese centers, oddly, took a very severe hit. So a lot of people feeling that China is now financially a little bit more isolated. We've seen other moves and pandemic moves that are related to that, but also travel in and out of China is now a problem in the Chinese, and perhaps the Australians, the New Zealanders, and a few others have got themselves in kind of a weird corner where it's difficult to see how they're going to get out of having not vaccinated, but at the same time been isolated. So China strangely took a stronger hit despite its economy doing well. As financial centers, they did a little bit worse.
Oh, out of your comments come so many more questions. Chris, could we move across to yourself, and can you give us some insights of the City of London, the financial services organizations, the other businesses within the city, of which you go from legal firms and everything else? How are they supporting the COP26 initiative, the drive of a different way to look at business overall from the City of London, from the City Corporation of London?
Well, look, Sharon, I mean, I think that over the next 5 years, or in fact, much further than that in terms of achieving zero net carbon, that climate action, climate change, ESG, these are going to be the words on everybody's lips, but it's not going to be talking about it. It's going to be what businesses are actually doing to actually interpret this and to aim for targets. We've got a hugely ambitious program of climate action in the corporation, all our buildings, everything, that all our portfolio of investments. And I actually think that the COP26 has to come forward with really concrete, agreed global proposals for tackling climate change. I will be at COP26 myself, representing the City of London Corporation. I'm chairing a full morning's meeting with all the regional mayors of the country, looking at what we're doing in the regions, around the regions of the United Kingdom. And I think broadly speaking now, every business, be it large or small, I might add, recognizes the need to tackle this whole issue of climate change and climate action. You know, there was a few years ago when it used to be a sort of a fashionably left-wing idea that only the loonies were interested in, frankly. Today, everybody across the board, or vast majority of people, recognize the importance of tackling the planet before the planet tackles us. So I see things very positively. I'm also a director of Heart of the City, which represents the SMEs in the city. And we've organized a complete program for them, for the SMEs, because it's much easier for the big corporates who can throw significant financial resource at this. It's much harder for the SMEs as they make their comeback. But we're trying to engage all the city businesses in this really critical global agenda.
The COP26 program has typically been accused in certain echelons of being a talk shop and not a doing shop. And there's a lot of the youth that are pushing much more for deliverables out of this year's COP engagement. In your heart of hearts, where, Chris, do you see COP26 achieving along that journey?
So first of all, let me say what I'm disappointed about with COP26. I'm disappointed that the President of China, the President of Russia are not going to be there, because they are some of the biggest emitters. And frankly, you know, yes, they can send high-level delegations, but symbolically, I like to see the head of state there. You need to see the president there actually participating. So that's a disappointment for me. So I think what needs to come out of COP26 is some real concrete plans and agreed programs and agreed strategies between the nations as to what they're going to do, when they're going to do it by, and how they're going to do it. There is always a danger with any big global conference, and particularly one that comes when the pandemic is still around, that it just does become a bit of a talking shop. Everybody says what they think others want to hear, but actually it doesn't come out with something that actually is different. And my hope, and look, it's beyond my pay grade, let's be absolutely clear about it. My hope is that governments will come together across the globe, centered on Glasgow, and will come back with concrete targets, concrete plans, and the method by which they're going to deliver.
That would be the most awesome outcome for all of us. And it's interesting how the pandemic has caused us all to focus differently around this whole ESG to climate change journey, as broad as it is, far more so than we were doing 20 months ago. It's almost sort of correlated to the pandemic. Just a side question. To what extent does the activities of the government, of Westminster, changes in Prime Minister, changes in parties, changes in ministers, things that we are seeing regularly at the moment, if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, how does that impact the city? And who would like to answer that one first? Because I don't know which one of you is more. You're laughing, Michael.
Well, I'll start, but Chris and I have often had late night discussions on the politics. I mean, just returning to climate change for a minute, it's an interesting area. Let's just look at how that affects finance in the city. So the City of London Corporation, unbeknownst to many people, was actually the very first Clean Air Act in 1953, before the government came out in 56. Also, it was COP number 3, Kyoto in 97, that the city picked up and ran with. The decision there, with no financial firms around and very few governments attending, was that carbon trading was the answer. And the city created the first carbon trading market and created the EU ETS market. So the city has been very, very behind it. I think it's been disappointing for me, all the chops and changes that you've seen has meant that really there's been little consistency in government policy. Now, looking at London as an international financial center, what happens a couple miles up the road is sort of neither here nor there. All countries are going through that. But looking as residents of that nation, and frankly, with a very strong component of the domestic market, it would be nice to have a leading green economy in the United Kingdom. But that requires things like a very firm and high carbon price, which politicians really haven't wanted to deal with. And the city has responded in areas like ESG, environmental, social governance, ratings and all, but those are marginal influence, frankly. One of the other proposals we've had out of the city has been, why doesn't the government issue climate bonds? But these are climate bonds tied to net zero. So like an inflation-linked bond, if in 2030 the government is 7 percentage points over its target, then it pays a 7% interest rate or something like that. Because the difficulty has been, how do you invest on 25 to 30-year time horizons? And that's what a typical energy plant, storage facility, in fact, you'd like it to last longer than that, when the policies are being made up Daily Mail to Daily Mail. And so we need some type of longer term structures for consistency if we're going to solve a long-term problem. Now, the natural reaction is say, oh, follow the Chinese. That's not what I'm talking about at all. We as democracies need to find ways to make long-term decisions. That sometimes means taking a little bit of time over the decision. And once we've made that decision, then we need to stick with it. And we need to compensate those who have followed that decision if we have to change direction, because things will arise. And that's where I feel we've been a little bit left down. Much of this has been very short-term policy formulation, followed by short-term policy change. And you can see that if you look at things like the Carbon Development Mechanism, the Green Deal, the way Drax is or isn't good or bad, our policies on nuclear energy, our policies on transmissions. And we sort of bumble our way along. We kind of bumble in the right direction, but there's a need for some real urgent, hard, clear action and thinking. And it's going to cost real amounts of money. And we need to say that and say what it is going to cost.
Chris?
So your point about governments and prime ministers, uniquely in British politics, in all local authorities and across the land, the Corporation of the City of London has 125 independent elected members. 25 of them are aldermen. That's our upper house, if you will, our House of Lords, which Michael's a member. And I always say their job is to breed Lord Mayors. That's what they do. They have to give birth to another Lord Mayor each year for us, and they do it beautifully. And then the other 100 of us are the Commons, the House of Commons, and effectively we run the government of the square miles of the city. And apart from 6 or 7 members, I think it is, who are Labour members, we're all independent. So what happens down at Westminster, whether we get a Labour government or a Tory government, whoever we get as Prime Minister, we work with them. We work with them. It doesn't matter which party they are, we have to work with them. And one of the factors of that as well is that all governments, national governments in this country, Labour or Conservative, have a bit of an eye on the corporation as to the future of the corporation. Do they really want us long term? Do they want to break us up and give a bit of us to all the local authorities around the square mile and effectively take us apart? So we have to work with governments of the day, and we do. And frankly, our relationships, particularly at the senior levels, i.e. the Lord Mayor, Chairman of Policy, with number 10 and number 11, no matter who the occupants are extraordinarily close.
Thank you very much for that. Just on a risk assessment point of view, we are seeing a much higher infection rate in COVID now, almost than we've seen from the beginning, but we are all behaving very differently in response to it due to the degree of vaccination or not globally, and how different that has been in different countries. Where's the city, maybe Chris first, on risk assessment of this current risk that is showing that could be impacting businesses very directly in the immediate short term? And what do you think are the risks of reforms going back into the worst of lockdown again, versus being able to keep the city open, being able to keep the economy open, to be able to get that balance of work from home or work from the office, transport, all those kinds of situations that are risking our people, but also risking our economy and the mental health and well-being of all individuals?
So Sharon, none of us really know, but I can only give you my personal opinion. So my personal opinion is I very, very much doubt we will go back into a major lockdown again. I think we may well go into some restrictions, whether it's wearing face masks again, compulsory in public, maybe encouraging those who want to or can do to work from home, but for short periods of time. I do not see another lockdown. And the reason I don't see another lockdown is not only the damage to the economy and to people's mental health, which I think we must never forget that point about people's mental health during the lockdown, but because we're in a different place to where we were a year ago. We have the vaccine program, and the vaccine program has broken the link between infection, and let me say transmissions are way too high and I think are likely to continue to grow in the short term, but that link between those and hospitalization and horrendously death is much more significantly broken. So I'm one of those who believes firmly we have to live with COVID now. We have to adapt to living with COVID. It's not going to go away. It's like flu. It's not going to go away. And I think getting things like the booster campaign absolutely moving much faster, like we did with the original vaccination campaign, are important. So I think the risk assessment to the city is that I think will go on. I think we will continue to be back in businesses in differing numbers. I am worried about the increasing rates of infection, but I don't think we're in anywhere near the risk and the position we were in this time last year.
So the human and economic risk is different. Michael, any input on that? But before you answer, people, if you'd like to add any questions into the chat, into the Q&A session, please, by all means, go ahead. We have got some coming through, which we'll pick up in a moment. But Michael, your view on current immediate risks?
Yeah, well, I'll keep it brief. I think Chris summarized the situation well, particularly the break. And basically, the pandemic has become or is becoming endemic. So it's just something we're going to live with. But I would encourage two things. The city has always been about trying to get information in. The city is an information processing engine. We help to make the global decisions of where resources are allocated. That's what finance is about. And to do that, we need good information. And there were periods in last year, I think it's much better this year, we're getting a lot more reliable, honest information from the government and other sources as well. And the second thing is to resist what I call false boosterism. Rah, 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 if you're not back at your desk. No, you're making a risk assessment. Make it. and take it where you will as a business, as an individual. That's up to you. And so things like the eat out to help out last August. Oh my gosh, this is false motivation towards something which just wasn't necessary. And likewise, I wouldn't be scaring people either. I'd say this is the information, make up your own mind. And we need that kind of balanced risk assessment at all levels. And to do that, we need good information.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions we have is asking both of you, following your observations on COP26 and GFI, how do we envisage the city, both the investors and the banks, getting directly involved in decisions on driving the implementation of the best technical solutions needed to drive and needed to deliver the high-level UK and COP26 policy ideas? I know you alluded to some of this, but we've got a far more technical question here. Michael, do you want to answer first?
Yes, well, one, it's an excellent question. And two, it's not going to happen by sending 25,000 people up to Glasgow to watch 500 people do their day job. I mean, this is just crazy. And it's not about awareness, we're aware. And Sharon, you pointed out, that the young are aware, the old are aware. I've been an environmentalist for 40 years plus, so we're all aware of it. And I think Barry's question here is, how do we get involved in it? There's two ways of doing it, and one is, sadly, at the moment, we are betting roughly 8-1 on fossil fuels. That is the decision about how to generate energy. That's what most people, when they look at the situation, they decide that's the way to go. So that's really the core thing we need to change. And the only way to change that is by changing the price mechanism. And that goes back to my point. So if we take the current price of carbon, which is roughly 40 or 50 in the UK, 60 or so in the EU, we've long known since COP3 in 97, we've known since April 2005, we've known since the Stern Review, any way you cut it, it comes down to about 2% of GDP, and it comes out to about £800 per Briton per year, about £3,200 a family. Oops, I said it, but that's it. So if you're looking at projects with those sorts of numbers, where you can honestly say, I'm going to offset that because it's costing that family £3,200 a year, and this heat pump will solve it over a reasonable period of time, or this new installation will do it, then we will solve the problem. That's how the city comes to bear on things. It does not come to bear on things by being aware. During the pandemic, as we saw a wide, wholesale behavioral change of the sort that environmentalists have always said, don't make an unnecessary trip, stay at home, don't waste, don't, led to a 6% temporary drop in emissions. So that's the most we're going to get out that way. The only way we're going to really achieve net zero, the other 96%, in fact, we would come back anyway, the other 100% out, is got to be by making it cost so much that we really do change behaviors and invest in long-term infrastructure that is zero impact.
Chris, anything you would like to add to that?
Michael is my technical brain. I take his answer.
Another question we've got, we were talking about the knowledge mile, Michael, that you were referring to earlier. Is there an opportunity for the knowledge mile to increase the financial literacy of young adults? Now, I'm going to broaden that question and say, in the greater UK, as well as greater London, not just in the financial centre.
Well, the straight answer is definitely. And I think it is happening. It could happen a lot faster, a lot better, but it is happening. I really get a lot more questions from young people. They feel that we have kind of screwed up the planet. And so they ask direct questions about finance. How does it work? And they keep probing it the way that the legendary 4-year-old girl does, but why? And I would encourage them to do that. Secondly, finance itself is becoming much more of a utility. And a lot of the things that we thought about as being finance, sort codes and bank numbers, all that's kind of getting cleared out. And because that's getting cleared up quite a bit, people can spend more time thinking about the basics. The basics being things like, what does it mean to distribute my portfolio? What are my long-term returns? How much do I need to save for my pension? Where are my investment monies going, and who controls them? These are all excellent questions that need to be constantly asked. And I think the third thing is really just integrated gaming and things. Children at very young ages are now handling money in games. We thought Monopoly was pretty cool, but every game these days.
I know Pall Mall so well. I know which colors are the right ones to have. And then you come here and you see all the tube lines are along those colors. You think, I learned that when I was really young.
Yeah.
One of the other questions is along the lines around, are we likely to see a carbon tax on individuals and a carbon tax on business and on consumers? Is that something we might see in the future?
I would caution against that. Most of the primary sources of carbon are actually large-scale facilities. It's one of the reasons for running a grid. And so you will be taxed. That's where that £800 per person comes in. It will be costing you, but 200 or 250 pounds, that might be in your electricity bill. You haven't seen electricity bills like they're going to be in the future.
Oh, they're already bad enough.
And we're going to be, well, that's what real change is going to involve. It doesn't come without pain. I'm sorry, and I listen to Radio 4 too, but it doesn't gel. So we're going to be seeing those sorts of. That's how you lead to large scale changes, through large scale price changes. Now, when we're playing with those sorts of numbers, I believe that we don't necessarily need to get into an individual tax issue. The administration of it would be close to crazy. And if you look at the broad areas, we have primary, there are 5 really: primary electricity generation, commercial buildings, domestic buildings, transportation, and agriculture. And the first 4 of those are easily handled centrally. As we tax petrol, but we don't tax you directly on your petrol. It's as you use it at the pump. Agriculture is probably the tricky one there. It's easy to get hold of it, what you might consider to be commercial or industrial agriculture, but at-home stuff could be quite abusive. But we're talking there something like less than 3 or 4% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So the vast bulk of it can be done without getting into the complexity of individual taxation.
I'm going to start drawing it to a close. We have 3 minutes. There are some unanswered questions. I apologize to those. The question I'd like to ask now is, as past sheriffs, what do you do with your day job now? Is there a city role over and above having gone back to business as normal outside of the role of sheriff? And what do you think, respectively, has been the best thing that's come out of the pandemic and the worst thing that's come out of the pandemic? So if I could just have a closing statement from each of you. Chris, would you like to go ahead?
Well, thank you, Sharon. And first of all, thank you so much for interviewing us this afternoon so professionally, if I may say so. For me, the future, my job, I very much hope so. I am the current deputy chairman of the policy committee of the corporation. If I'm re-elected to the court in March next year, I become the chairman of the policy committee for 5 years, and that's a global job. That is the political leader of the corporation. It's like the prime minister of the city, effectively. So there's a big job for me to do for the next 5 years if I get re-elected, and I hope I do, and it's something I would love to do. In the best and the worst of the pandemic, I think the best was actually reaching out to more people across the globe than you could ever do without technology. We really have the benefits of what we've done today. Mean we're talking to people in all corners of the world in a way we just didn't do before the pandemic. So I think that's been a huge gain. The worst of it for me has been the inability to have those human relationships. We are people. However much we look at each other down a screen, there's nothing like being in the same room as other people, chatting to people face to face, dining with them, socializing with them. I've really missed people. I think that's been the worst part of the pandemic for me.
Thank you, Chris. So personally spoken as well. Thank you.
Well, I guess for me, one of the important things for an alderman is to become Lord Mayor. One must be an alderman and have been a sheriff. And so that's been a milestone for me. And I do have ambitions in that regard, but I have to get my fellow aldermen and fellow liverymen to agree with that, which I'll be working on. So I would like that. But it never stops. And it's not about being Lord Mayor, being sheriff. Chris is a common councilman and he works harder than I do, I think. But today I spent this morning with St. Joseph's Hospice up in Hackney, which is the hospice for the city, and trying to reconnect that with the city. And all 125 of us do that all the time in many, many different ways. So I don't want to claim I'm some saintly person or anything like it. We just all do it because we care about our community. So I think when you look to the positives and the negatives, well, a bit like Chris, I just phrase it slightly differently. I think one of the best things is that our city community has been extended outside the city just that little bit more due to technology, due to the way people are thinking about what does it mean to be in the City of London if I haven't been there for 20 months, but I still feel I'm part of it, which many people do, and I want to see that extended. I'm not sure there has been a worse thing. People have lost loved ones and all of that. I'm not ignoring that. Around my house, they say that the worst thing is that they can see my little toes again. Having wandered around in bare feet for 18 months, my little toes peeked out and they're still there. Which of course means that my shoes are inordinately uncomfortable now that lockdown has ended. But with that one little whinge of mine to one side, no, I think that we will go forward and we will emerge much better if we do go out. And as I like to say, carpe diem, we need to go and seize the day.
Thank you very much, both of you. That has been an absolutely fascinating talk. The degrees of thank yous that I'm seeing and the reliance upon you to go and negotiate our financial well-being back from Europe has also been alluded to in some of the questions. So I thank you for the amount of work you do for the City of London, for the greater economy of the UK, and for the political stability that it brings by yourselves doing the amount of work that you are doing. So thank you. I could just see hundreds of thank yous pouring through. It has been fascinating. I'm not even going to try and summarize. I think, Chris, you did it very aptly, from the business opportunities to the personal losses, and how do we make the most of the new world, of being able to reach people we could never do before. Recordings are there forever, as Michael, you said in Xenian. Your recording viewings in the very short period exceed those that attended. Least of all, the tail that is there, and that information is there forever that we wouldn't have had in the previous ways of doing things. So thank you for putting some history down, some personal experiences, alluding to our new greener economy, and telling us how the city is going to make London and the centre of London and the financial centre as strong as it possibly can be. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time, and to everyone else who's attended, I really appreciate what you have done. The Chamber has got a lot of events coming up over the next 6 weeks before our drinks on the 1st of December, which we hope will be in person. And in between, we've got an ESG event discussing some of the more niche aspects of the green economy. And one of the other events that we're looking at is talking to one of the big energy suppliers in Africa. And the other one is talking to a scientist around COVID and what that has done to certain countries. So we have a really interesting agenda ahead over the next 4 or 5 weeks. So please continue to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks for your time.
Bye all.